All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. We've been going over Tony Gaddis's Starting Out with Java, Early Objects, 5th edition textbook. I'm on Chapter 8 of 16, and as you can see here, the chapter is entitled Text Processing in Wrapper Classes. Our topics in here, wrapper classes, of course. We'll talk character testing and conversion with a character class. We'll get into a little bit more depth and breadth of coverage about string objects. One thing you may or may not remember about strings is that they're immutable. If you don't remember what that is, we'll talk about it in a bit. But if you want to be able to change a string and literally change it, you can't do it with a string, but you can with a string builder. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about how to tokenize strings. And if you go tokenize, well, think about it. When we speak, we tokenize. When we speak, even if it's just for a second or so, or part of a second, we don't run words together like this. We don't run words together. So in other words, I don't say, we don't run words together. Something like that. All right. If you think about a book is made up of chapters. Chapters are made up of pages. Pages are made up of paragraphs. Paragraphs are made up of sentences. Sentences are made up of words, etc. And when we start thinking about our sentences, how do we end a sentence? With a period. All right? And what is a sentence made out of? It's made out of a bunch of words. Those words are the individual tokens that make up a sentence. We'll talk about some of the wrapper classes for the numeric data types, and at the end, we'll look at a test score reader class. So, remember, Java provides for us 8 primitive data types, and I started working on this a little bit earlier. We've got the ones that hold numeric whole numbers. All right. We can have the ones that hold numeric with a decimal. Doesn't have to, but it can have a decimal. And remember that those are double and float. That's 6 of our 8. And then we'll put here, I don't know if you'd agree with this, but we'll say miscellaneous primitive data types. Oops. And under those, we'll talk about char, which is a single character, and boolean, which is a true false. So those are our 8 type of primitive variables. They're called primitive because there's only a limited number of things that you can do with them. They're not created from a class, all right? They're also known as elementary data items because they're in their most basic form. They can all only hold one value at a time. Java, as it says, provides what are called wrapper classes for all of these primitives. When you use a wrapper class with a primitive, you kind of promote the primitive so it's able to do other things that it couldn't do otherwise. All right? All right, the wrapper classes are part of the java.lang package, so to use them, there's no import that you have to use. You can just literally start using them. Okay? All right. So as it says, the wrapper classes allow you to create objects to represent a primitive. Wrapper classes are immutable. So once you create an object, you can't change its value. Okay? To get the value stored in the object, you call a method. And there's different ways that you can use wrapper classes, different methods. All right, the character class allows a char to be wrapped in an object. So you might say, why would I want to do something like this? Because when you use a primitive data type, there's very few things you can do with it. You can assign a value to it. You can compare two primitives of the same type, etc. But other than that, there's not much you can do with them. But if you wrap your primitive in a wrapper, all right, if you put a wrapper around it, now it becomes the equivalent of an object. And there are a lot of methods that you can use to work with it. All right. When you work with a character class, here's some of the things that you can do. I'm not going to read these to you. But you'll notice in each case, what you're doing is you can check you pass in an individual character and you can find out exactly what type of character it is. All right? So what I could do is every time I inputted a character, I could check it by running it against these functions, and I could tell you exactly what kind of character it was if I wanted to do that. Two of the more populars are the to lower and the to upper, to make something lowercase or make something uppercase. All right. The string class. The string class, as mentioned there, provides several methods. I already did this earlier. I went out to the Java API. You may or may not remember that. And I brought up the string class and went through some of the stuff that's in there. Well, one of the things that's mentioned right here is a substring. And a substring is a string that's part of another string. Now, what does that mean? All right. Well, literally what that means is, let's say that I've got a sentence in here. All right. And kind of the classic sentence. Now is the time for all good people to come to the aid of their party. Okay. And I wanted to know if the substring art, A-R-T, was in that sentence. Well, it is, because to come to the aid of their party, A-R-T, but that would be an example of a substring I would be trying to find as part of another string. So in your book, they've got a chart or a table that goes through many of these searching methods for the string class. I'm not going to run through those with you, okay? Other than to show you a little, like, again, starts with. Does it start with a certain thing? Okay? Starts with is case sensitive too. Ends with, the opposite of starts with. You can work with, as it says there, with different regions. All right? So in other words, I may want to compare two strings, but I don't want to compare the entire strings to see if they're equal. I want to compare a portion of this string with a portion of this string. All right? And if you say, I don't get it, sure you do. Let's say, as an example, this is a kind of a weird example, but it just came to me, so I'll use this one. Let's say that you had a list of people's names, and you wanted to find out how many people had, and I don't know why you do this, but you wanted to find out how many people either had a middle initial that was a vowel, A, E, I, O, U, or Y, let's say, or didn't have a middle initial at all. So you could compare things using regions, for example. You'll notice that this has an ignore case. Many of these string functions have an ignore case, because most of the time when you're looking through something, at least there's a chance whatever you're looking through could hold uppercase or lowercase or both. All right, there's index of, last index of, so you can search from the beginning, you can search from the end, and there are plenty of examples that are in here. This is a very busy table taken right from the book, but again, I'm not going to read through it, but they go through some of the string methods that you can use with substrings. Okay? All right. And again, there's many ways that you can do this. All right? Okay. Now, they give a good example in here. They give the code here, but let's look at it in here. It says the full name variable holds the address of a string object. So the full name holds this. The last name holds this. All right? And what they're saying is we start with character 0 here. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So that's the 15th character, or character 14. That's what they're talking about right there. That's that 14. All right? The string class has a lot of different things that you can use. It literally has scores of different methods. All right? And some of them you might use quite a bit. Some of them you may use very rarely, and many of them you'd probably never use. Here's a couple. Get chars to store a substring in a character array. To-char array to return a string object's contents in an array of char values. Some of these in here make a lot of sense. Concat allows you to concatenate two string objects. It's like using the plus sign almost for string concatenation. Replace. We're all used to using word processing packages that have search and replace. Trim is a big one. Trim removes leading and trailing spaces. And just so you see this, and you probably get it already, but I just want to mention it to you. So let's say that I say, there's a prompt on the screen that says, enter your name. And the person isn't paying much attention, so they hit space a couple times. Then they put in their name. And then they hit space a couple more times. If I run, the actual value that we put in there was this. Now, I wouldn't want to put that into a database or someplace else because there's blank spaces in it. If I trimmed it, it would get rid of all the leading spaces. So everything before the J that were leading spaces and all the trailing spaces. But I do want to mention, now my name is Jeff Scott, of course, but let's say my name was Jeffrey O. Scott. And let's say that I had a space there. It was like this. All right? So if I call the trim function, it'll get rid of all the leading and all the trailing. But it will not, repeat, it will not get rid of blank characters in the middle of the string. So that one it won't get rid of, and that one it will not get rid of. All right? Trim is used a lot, though. The string class provides several overloaded value of methods, all right, that return the string representation. So in other words, if I say what is the string value of Boolean true, it's the word true. It's the string true. What's the string value of 5.0? And it's the string 5.0. This has a numeric value. This does not. This has a Boolean value. This does not. This is an actual character. This is not. None of these are characters. They're all strings because they're all in double quotes. And you can see there's an example program here. All right? All right, I mentioned earlier the string builder class. Notice the second bullet because that's the key thing. You may change the content of string builder objects. Okay? Quite often you'll do things if you're going to use string builder like this. You might ask the user, you might say, what is your first name? Okay, so you've got a string that's called first name. And so I put Jeffrey in there. What is your middle initial? Or what is your middle name? So I put Paul in there. What is your last name? I put Scott in there. Those are three strings. All right, then I could really create a new string and add those together, but typically you use a string builder, and I would concatenate together the first name, the middle name, and the last name. Then I would convert that string builder into a string. So notice at the very bottom of this slide, it says a string builder object can grow and shrink in size as needed. So if I put Jeff Paul Scott and somebody says, oh no, we need your full name, and then I say, oh, Jeffrey Paul Scott. That won't work with a regular string. That'll work just fine with a string builder. All right. When you set up a string builder, notice if you don't put anything in the parentheses, it gives you something that'll hold up to 16 characters. If you put an integer in there, I could put 1,000 in there, and that would give me enough storage space for 1,000 characters. If I put an actual string in there, it'll initialize the string builder with that string. String and string builder have a lot of things in common. So in other words, string builder in many ways is a subset of string. You can use a lot of the same methods of string for string builder. You can append in a string builder in several different ways. Again, it's not my intention. There's absolutely no way with these lectures being, well, how long is this one now? We are probably only in about 20 minutes, not even 15 minutes. But most of these lectures are averaging 45 minutes to an hour. And there's no way in that amount of time that we can go over everything and every single possibility, etc. All right, even later when I start going back and doing some programs, there'll be a lot of stuff in here. You'll say, well, he didn't talk about that. No, he didn't talk about that. There's just not the time. Great example of you cannot do this directly with a string, but you can with a string builder. So we are combining together. We sold 12 donuts for $15.95. All right. Along with append, string builder has several overloaded versions of insert. All right. And append, it typically adds it to the end. Insert typically puts it wherever you want it to go. All right. String builder has a replace method that replaces an existing substring with a new substring. Okay. An example of that, let's suppose, I mean, for a long time, you what was it? You exactly wouldn't call a lady, you wouldn't call her Miss or Mrs. It was just to be Ms. or something like that. Maybe today you've got that and you don't want that. Maybe every time that there is a Ms. in there, you want to find out if they're married or not married and put Miss or Mrs. or vice versa. All right. The example they use here is they replace the word Chicago with the word New York. So instead of saying we moved from Chicago to Atlanta, it'll say we moved from New York to Atlanta. Much of the stuff that they're doing in here, you look at it and you're like, okay, here's methods to set and delete characters. Yeah, but you can do this programmatically using Java. You're not working in Microsoft Word or something like that here. All right? All right, we talked a little bit earlier about the tokenizer. All right, and working with the string tokenizer. I told you before that tokens are a series of words that are separated by spaces or something else. So if we look at the example that's right here, all right, maybe they're different flavors of ice cream. I don't know. But the token, the character is a blank. All right. So there's 4 tokens in there, and the token character is a blank. Now, sometimes that doesn't work. Here's an example where you've got your delimiter, your separator are semicolons. Quite often, you'll have something like this. You'll have commas. In fact, if you've never heard of it before, a lot of times a file like that will be called a CSV file, a comma-separated variable file. All right. What if we wanted to do this? What if we wanted to break this date into its 3 components? Well, we've got a natural token right there, which is the dash. If we're working with a path name, we've got a natural token, which is the /, etc. If you want to use any of these, you must import java.util.string tokenizer into your program. And here are the 3 different constructors that are available for it. So here is creating a string tokenizer with the default delimiters, just blank space. Here, we're creating it and we're letting it know that the delimiter is not the default, it's the minus sign. Sometimes when you work with this, and you'll see this in just a minute, you can have more than one tokenizer. For instance, if I was breaking up an email address, I might have the @ sign, I might have periods, and some other stuff. String tokenizer, as it says, the class provides different methods, including count tokens to count the remaining tokens in the string, has more tokens, which looks to see if you're at the end or not, next token, which returns the next one. Quite often, as mentioned in here, you'll put this all into a loop. And it's kind of a neat example that they show right there. I already mentioned the multiple delimiters. There's the @ sign and the period. All right, so we're saying in here that both of them are in there, and that would break down joe@gaddisbooks.com into Joe, Gaddis Books, and com. So you could work with each one. There's a split method that you can use also on this. As it says, it returns an array of string objects. And I believe the last thing just about that's going to be discussed in the chapter starting here will be the numeric data type wrappers. Notice 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's all every one of the numeric types. There isn't one, to my knowledge. We looked at char before. I don't think there's one for Boolean. But it's the same word as the data type, except it's got a capital letter. All right? Now, I'm going to have to pause for just a second, and we'll continue in just a moment. All right. It's kind of interesting. I never seem to get a lot of phone calls, but I have been tonight. So here they talk about creating a wrapper object. So if we do this, what we're doing is we're creating a wrapper object called number. All right, it is not an integer. It is part of the integer wrapper class. So there are things that we're able to do with it that we couldn't do with a quote regular integer. All right. You can also take and assign a regular integer to a wrapper class object. So why is this important? Well, as you'll see when we go through some programmatic examples, when you work with this stuff, one of the things that's nice that Java provides for you are different parse functions. Now these are like the parse float and the parse int that you have available in JavaScript. But there is a parse, there's an integer.parse int, a double.parse double, etc. Those are probably the two you're going to use the most often. But each of the numeric wrapper classes that we looked at, all right? So byte, short, int, long, double, and float. Each one of them has a static method that converts a string to a number. They all begin with parse, and here's some examples. If what is in here, notice in each one of these there's strings, but they're all numeric values within a string. If you put something non-numeric in there and you try to run one of the parse functions, you get a number format exception. We'll talk about exceptions in more detail in a later chapter. Each of the numeric wrapper classes has a static toString method to convert a number to a string, and they show you some examples there. Integer and long have additional things, so if you want to go to binary, which is base 2, if you want to go to hex, which is base 16, or you want to go to octal, which is base 8. So if you're working in other number systems, you'd be able to do that. A couple kind of interesting final or constant variables are min value and max value, because what they basically store are the smallest number and the largest number for a particular data type that the system that you're working with will support. All right, the last thing that's discussed in here, what do we got? Just about the last thing, is auto boxing and unboxing. It's a little bit confusing, and I probably can't find it right now, but in the past, I have looked up and I have found auto boxing versus unboxing. Because there used to be some really good articles out on the internet regarding this. All right. This is right from Oracle itself. Anything that comes from docs.oracle, Oracle owns Java. So you're going to get the best stuff in here. So right here, this particular example not only goes through the definitions of boxing and unboxing, but it looks like at least, several examples. Let me blow this up a bit. All right. Blow it up even more than that. That should be plenty big. There are a lot of places that you can go to get information. They define here auto boxing as the conversion that the Java compiler makes between a primitive and its associated object wrapper class. Converting a primitive into an object of that wrapper class is called auto boxing. And unboxing then is the reverse. So converting a wrapper to its corresponding primitive is unboxing. And this is probably going to be as good of an article right here as you're going to find on the subject. All right? It's something that you would probably use if you were a professional Java programmer, but for the stuff we're doing, it's not that it's not important, but in the main scheme of things, it's not as important as a lot of the other things that we go over. And there's the author has an error in his stuff here, so let's see if I can. I don't think he meant to say you nay. I think he meant to say you may. So you can declare a wrapper class variable and assign it a value. It says you may think that this is an error, but because number is a wrapper class, auto-boxing occurs. Unboxing does the opposite. Okay? So again, when you auto-box, you're basically saying, okay, I want you to be able to use this primitive as though it's a wrapper object. And when you go the other way from wrapper object to primitive, that's unboxing. It says, recall that the array list only works with objects. Auto-boxing and unboxing allow you to conveniently use array lists with primitives. A lot of the stuff with that happens behind the scenes and you don't even really realize that it's happening. All right, I don't have my book with me, but at the end of the chapter, as mentioned here, there is an example of a test score reader class. So I'm not going to go over that because, again, I don't have the book. Save this because it's got the change I made in it. And in the next chapter that we go through in here, all right, and the next chapter is Chapter 9, we go back to talking about object-oriented programming, and we get into the idea of inheritance. And just so you see it, what we will get into will be something that looks sort of like this. So I'm going to use the same one that I'm using, but I'm going to move it way down here. And I'm going to say, well, what if we create a class that's called employee? And all employees have a first name and a last name, etc., etc. Okay? Then, from there, we make another class that's called hourly employee. And we make another class that's called commission employee. And we make another class that's called piecework employee. This is the kind of stuff we'll talk about in the next chapter. Now, this may make absolutely no sense to you, which is totally fine if it doesn't. All right? But the point is, when you look at this, the thing to comprehend is these right here, these are all children of this right here. And let's say that I had, under hourly employee, I had full-time and I had part-time. And they were both types of hourly employees. Then these two would be children of this, and these two would be grandchildren of this type of an idea. So that's what we'll get into in the next chapter. We'll talk a little bit about inheritance hierarchies, etc. Be back with that shortly.